For our next story, let's go back in history. The year was 1990. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The Cold War was ending. So Russia and NATO signed a landmark pact. It was called the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. It was a security agreement. And here's what it said. Russia and NATO won't build forces at each other's borders. It was important to avoid conflict between the Cold War rivals. But now that deal has been junked. Moscow has formally pulled out of it. They called it, quote unquote, untenable. So NATO has suspended the pact. It says Russia's exit makes the treaty unsustainable. Do you know what this means? The war in Ukraine is eroding the gains made after the Cold War. Here's a report.
The early 1990s were an optimistic period for the world. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union had collapsed. It brought a sense of hope, peace, and along with it, a new world order. Russia-West tensions looked like they were a thing of the past. This was supposed to be the decade of cooperation and diplomacy. So Moscow and NATO signed a security pact. It was called the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, also known as the CFE Treaty. At that time, this was a landmark move. It set constraints on conventional arms and equipment. The purpose was simple: prevent military buildup at mutual borders and help maintain peace in Europe. 32 years after this was signed, Russia invaded Ukraine, so all bets were off. Moscow mobilized its forces, and so did the NATO. Europe was on the brink of war once again, a war that the treaty hoped to prevent. So what exactly went wrong? This treaty was quite unpopular in Russia. When it was signed, Moscow had the upper hand in weaponry, so to give away those gains didn't make sense. And it seems like Moscow regretted it too. In 2007, they suspended participation in the treaty. In 2015, they mentioned their intent to withdraw. But this year, they've finally done it.
Show the result. For 405, against no, abstentions no. The federal law was adopted unanimously. Colleagues, I congratulate you.
Moscow has formally pulled out of the Cold War treaty. Russia blames two things for this: the United States and NATO's expansion plans. NATO, on the other hand, has condemned this. It too has suspended participation. A majority of NATO's 31 members signed this, including Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. And this isn't the first treaty Moscow has pulled out of. It's unlikely to be the last. Last week, Russia pulled out of a nuclear test ban treaty. Before that, the US backed out of a nuclear forces treaty. It shows you the trend. Russia-US tensions are undermining key arms treaties. All of these pacts were signed in the late 80s and 90s. They were a sign of easing tensions, a sign of trust between the East and the West. But that no longer seems to be the case.
What is needed right now is more transparency, more risk reduction, more what we would call guardrails on competition. We basically need to manage the competition so that it doesn't spiral into crippling arms races, crippling in terms of cost and instability. And we need to manage the risk of unintentional escalation and unintentional conflict.
So after 33 years, is it back to square one? The gains made after the Cold War are eroding. Moscow-US relations are at an all-time low. There's a war going on in Europe. The West has sanctioned Russia. Moscow remains on the offensive, and the world remains on edge.